Those of you online, I'm going to give everybody a template in class, and if you were away, you can figure it out as you go. Broke the 1920s and 30s into a number of categories. First of all, Canadian independence, which is a great theme, right, and we can expect a question on. Labor, which I broke into 20s and 30s, just so we go over a couple of events, what happened with working class. Nature of the boom, which we're actually going to do quite quickly, okay? Consumer products and the like. Causes of the crash, which many of you did a little memory device on, and so what we'll talk about, what we need to remember there is the economic cycle. Economic cycle is what we're going to have to remember there. Impact of the crash, and then government intervention, which you did an essay on, most of you, so we're pretty good with this section. I think you don't think you are. There's some little multiple choicey things that maybe you're going to, that are going to be trivial, but I think most of us are pretty good with it. So let's talk about Canadian independence. The Shenak crisis. Yes, now we'll get into true trivia. The Shenak crisis, which we only need to know because Britain asked Canada to help and Canada said no. Then we had the Halibut Treaty, which of course Canada signed for, loudly, for the halibut. I know it's early in the morning, we still need to get that one. They signed by themselves. Good job. With the US. So US and Canada, no Britain, right? Again, steps forward. We'd signed that Treaty of Versailles, the Paris Peace Conference earlier, but now we're making steps. The next one's a little more complex, and that is, it was called, there's three terms that come together. The Imperial Conference, which led to something called the Balfour Report, which led to something called the Statute of Westminster. I have no idea why they insist on this, except for maybe, there's a great chance to ask a difficult question. They all have the same thing. The Imperial Conference was Canada and Australia asking to get out of, remember Grandma was always telling us what to do, who we could date. We could make our own decisions at home, remember this? But we couldn't make our own decisions when it comes to our affairs, our foreign affairs, if you will. And so Canada and Australia said, hey, we want to be able to make our own decisions. A guy named Balfour said, I think they should be allowed to make their own decisions. And then they made a set of laws called the Statute of Westminster. And the Statute of Westminster says, hey, we're not an empire anymore, we're a commonwealth. So we went from an empire to a commonwealth. And the importance was Canada could make her own decisions. Basically independent at that point, except that our Constitution was still sitting in Britain. By the way, what's another word for independence? Well done, Gabby. I already heard that. Okay. What's another word for independence? Oh, I know it's early. Come on. That's right. Autonomy. Well done. And sovereignty. Independence, autonomy, sovereignty, they're a little bit nuanced and different, but basically those three words mean the same thing. So if you run into them, that's what they're asking. How did Canada become more autonomous? How did Canada become more sovereign, independent? Okay? Now, so we're independent from Britain, what's the problem? We're independent from Britain, but?
Our council's over there?
What's that?
Our council's over there?
No. Thank you for playing. We're closer to the US. Remember, we break away from Britain, but we get close to the United States. So this was the one where we talked about, this pen is just not working for me, where we talk about the US getting closer to us through entertainment. I'm also going to mention here, obviously, something called branch plants. We tried to keep United States companies from buying Canadian companies, and they got around it by hiring Canadians to run their own companies. So remember the term branch plants. The only other thing I'm going to mention right here, more Luke, is prohibition. Prohibition happened in Canada briefly. Just a little side note, it stopped. You couldn't keep Canadians from drinking. It was a provincial thing. And then what ended up happening was the US carried prohibition on for a decade afterwards, so Canada was sneaking booze across, which leads to all kinds of beer commercials for Sleemans. All right, we called it rum runners. Prohibition, did it decrease violence or increase violence? Increased it, yes, okay, very good. Luke, up in the top corner there, you should find this one. So guys, we broke away from Britain, got closer to the States. You're tired this morning. Luckily your exam's an afternoon exam, you'll be fine. Let's jump over to labor in the 1920s. All right, labor in the 1920s. After World War I, soldiers come home. By the way, soldiers are workers. We always forget that, but soldiers were workers. So they had cardboard boots, Ross rifles, won the war for Canada, made us all proud, came home and got given very small pensions. And there wasn't a lot of work for them because all the war industry closed down. And inflation started to go up. What did this lead to? Winnipeg General Strike. Thank you for arriving. Luke had been quiet. All right. The Winnipeg General Strike. I think one of the reasons they went on strike was because they could not get a good dry market. Did it fail or succeed? It succeeded in the long term, but failed in the short term. Okay? Again, causes were wages versus inflation. Sounds familiar. Wages versus inflation. Unions wanted the right to work together. The thing with the Winnipeg General Strike was, it wasn't just unions that walked out, it was everybody. In fact, they called it, when they walked out, one big union, or OBU. Okay, and you'll see that if they want to be evil, they'll ask you what one big union was. All right, hopefully they won't, but now you know. It was just everybody in Winnipeg walked out. It failed. Remember they brought the private strikebreakers in with the bats? They fired the police, beat everybody up, and then they had it's always a bloody Saturday or Sunday. It's never on a weekday. But they had a day where a couple people, one guy was killed, I think maybe two. Anyhow, it failed. They were crushed. But in the long run, what they were asking for, happened, right? Okay, so that's a U, not a Y. In the 1930s, we're going to jump now. How did labor do in the 1930s? Well, unemployment was incredibly high. We'll deal with that in a second. They did have one big event in the 1930s where labor stood up and tried to do something. The On to Ottawa Trek, okay? And that was relief camp workers. So in the 1930s, we can see more of the same. The On to Ottawa Trek. Bennett was the prime minister at the time. Did it succeed in the short run or fail? It failed. They wanted unemployment insurance and fair wages. Failed in the short run, but successful in the long run. Okay, it's kind of hard to take in the short run, but in the long run, things turn around. So, on to Ottawa Trek, again, resulted in the Regina riots. You might remember these were relief camp workers, and we'll talk about the relief camps in a bit. Relief camp workers were on their way there. So the story of labor in the 1920s and 30s, even though the 20s were a boom time and things were good, they weren't getting great wages. Okay? They were working, they were happy, but they weren't getting great wages. And then, of course, when times were bad, they did a couple times strike and try to get better wages, better conditions, and in both cases they would fail, they'd be crushed. However, in the long run, their ideas would take root. Okay? Let's jump over and do one more, and then we'll do one or two more here. We're going pretty quick. Nature of the boom. Well, the boom. Now, this is a big hint, guys. You tend to forget the boom happened. You like to think that it went from World War I, everybody came home and they lost their jobs and it was the Depression. You forget about the 1920s, which really sucks because the 1920s were really quite awesome. All right? It was a huge economic boom. It went really, really well. What kind of products came out during the boom? What's a big one? What's that? Washing machine. We just watched that online. The washing machine is one. Home products. What was the basis of that? Electricity. I mean, electricity had been around for a while, but now it was coming into homes. And when electricity comes into homes, all those products you see in the kitchen, stoves. Remember that picture of the modern kitchen in the 1920s of stoves and fridges? And we talked about, could you imagine not having a fridge or trying to cook a cake in a wood-fired stove? Like, how much work it would be for women. So we talked about all those consumer products, and what was one of the pieces that came out of it? What's that? Time for women. Electricity. I'm sorry. I'm gonna get myself a better pen. Somebody see if there's a black pen on my desk and throw it at me. I'll go with green for a second. So electricity, I'm going to write consumer products. And when I say consumer products, I'm talking about everything from phones, radios, what else could we say? Phones, radios, stoves, fridges, washing machines. And we just talked about the importance of the washing machine even in the developing world, right? How these things gave time to women. And you're missing one more, just the car. And the car, with the development of the assembly line, you know, they were able to make products faster and cheaper and lots of them. I'm kind of in your way. That follow? And then we talked not just about time for women and changing their lifestyle because they got work, but also pizza. And when I talk pizza, I mean that the economy goes boom. People are working, they're buying pizza, and what economists call it is a spin-off. If you're working, it's a spin-off. It's a positive spin-off. Does that follow? All right? So the 1920s were a great time. Lots of people working. Did everybody get access to all this great time?
No.
No, and we're going to talk about that when we do equality. Because when we do equality, we'll do a thing on women all the way through. And right? Don't forget, though, this was the time of the famous five. Women doing just traditional labor, basically. Residential schools for First Nations, right? Cut off lands, you know. And so you got the idea. So not everybody was getting equal access to this great boom. Was there no black pens back there, Jordan? My goodness me. All right.